I'm absolutely fascinated how the mind and the thought process is working for both David Moyes and David Sullivan. I can't have been the only one who yesterday, when the teams were announced for Leverkusen against West Ham, well, I say the teams, I mean the West Ham team primarily, I looked at it, it looked stale. It looked old. It looked like it needed an injection of freshness. Look, I'm not telling you anything you don't know already. But there's one thing you know in it, and there's one thing me know in it. It appears to me as if the club don't know it. Or they know it, but they're making these half-baked, half-assed attempts at trying to fill the squad. Now, I do understand as I record this, we may well progress even further down the route of signing Edson Alvarez. The most recent report I've seen is that £148,000 a week. I'm not going to get into all that because they contradict each other. I sit here saying I want us to make signings, and then I sit here and start complaining that we can't match wages and stuff like that. This is the guy we're honestly going for, and we believe him to be the very best available. Then fine, go and get him. But up to this point, we've not signed a single bloody player. And I think it becomes increasingly difficult for even the most fervent supporters of David Moyes and David Sullivan to make a case that what they're doing in this transfer window is working. Because it's clearly not. If the strategy was to wait until the last minute, then, well, that's a hell of a risky strategy. And at the moment, it's not served us too well because whilst the team lineups for that game against Leverkusen looked old and laboured, it wasn't half as old and laboured as the performance itself, it has to be said. We look disjointed. And when I talk about the thought process, let's just deal with David Sullivan first. What must David Sullivan have thought, if he did think at all? And again, I'm making the assumption that David Sullivan had this thought process. If it was me, I would have looked at it and thought, well, hold on a second. This is the team that has been part put together by my director of football, who I've just hired. And I'm not going to pretend to know how many of those players were handpicked by Tim Steidten. I don't know. I'm not going to claim it. But let's just say some, a few, whatever. But I think it's fair to say that he would have played some part in the composition of that Leverkusen setup. To see West Ham being dismantled in that way, I think if I was David Sullivan, I'd be thinking, what the hell is going on here? Because you've only got to look at your own team in comparison. And when I say team, let's go with the whole squad. Let's look at what's actually happened at the moment. I'll be looking at a half-empty bench, quite frankly, because, well, two senior coaches have been lost. I am aware we may have appointed a junior coach or two at this point, but senior coaches, people that are in David Moyes' ear on the bench during match days, that the guy that's always talking to him on the touchline, his confidant, his chief lieutenant, gone. The main coach hired last year, gone. So I'll be looking at that thinking, well, hold on, collectively, the footballing minds on that bench can't equal what is on offer at Leverkusen. Then I'll be looking at the players, and I mean, there's a lot of players who just want out. Scamacca wants out. He's going. It's as simple as that. He's going because he can't thrive at West Ham. He can't play at West Ham. The manager cannot find a way for him to operate within his system. It is complete. I've laboured the point too many times. It was the wrong player for West Ham to sign. I'd still love to know who sanctioned that deal, by the way. I'll be looking at that. I'll be looking at the fact Aaron Cresswell wants... I mean, for Aaron Cresswell to want to leave, wow. Something has got to be very, very wrong there. Antonio, well, we know he wants to leave as well. We're clearly having a problem signing players. So what does David Moyes think about that? Well, how does David Moyes feel when these players turn round and say to him, so Scamacca, whether Scamacca says to him, or whether his agent tells David Moyes, or whether the agent tells David Sullivan and David Sullivan tells David Moyes, I don't know how it works when a player wants to leave. I don't know. I've never been a player. Do they go and walk into the office? I don't know. But David Moyes would have absolutely known that Scamacca feels that he can't play for him. He has to leave. How does David Moyes feel about that? Because I think if it was me, and I was, it doesn't even have to be a football team, does it? And I was running whatever, a company or whatever the case may be, and people kept on leaving, citing me as the example. You'd have to have a look at yourself, wouldn't you? Basically, my staff kept on saying, I'm leaving, I can't work under you. You can't get the best out of me. How aloof would you have to be to carry on in that manner? I find it unfathomable, actually. But what I find equally unfathomable is sort of everybody seems to be looking, not everybody, there's a lot of people looking for one villain, one pantomime villain, to such an extent they can't see the two. They're both as bad as each other. They are a match made in absolute hell. David Sullivan and David Moyes. As a pairing, these two cannot operate. Do I think David Moyes can operate? I think he can under a manager like Bill Kenwright, who allows him to do what he wants and backs him. Yes, David Moyes can thrive in that environment. Can David Sullivan, I wouldn't say thrive, can David Sullivan operate in an environment? Yes, but he needs a different manager to David Moyes. He needs a manager who's going to let basically David Sullivan be boss and almost help buy and sell players and keep involved. As a match, as a pairing, they just clash. They absolutely do. But I think, what would I think if I was David Moyes? It's not just Skamaka. I mean, there are many, many players. Surely he must notice that there's a whole string of miserable players coming into his office. Aaron Cresswell leaving. I'd be thinking, well, why, Cressy? Why do you want to leave? At some point, you question yourself, don't you? You surely would. But we're in this situation. Even look what Mark Warburton said. Mark Warburton said, I had to leave before my friendship with David Moyes got destroyed. Now listen, Mark Warburton was a forthright, plain-speaking bloke, and we were lucky enough to have him on Hammers Chat. He's that forthright. He's not going to just, the first time he announces it, and announce it on Talk Sport or announce it on Hammers Chat. He's not going to do that. He's going to have a chat with David Moyes. What does David Moyes think when his friend says that to him? His friend who he goes on holiday with. Mate, I can't. That's what I don't know how the conversation went, but it was something like, mate, I just can't carry on like this. Look, we're mates, we've been mates for years, but I cannot carry on like this. I cannot operate within your coaching structure because it's going to destroy our friendship. I need to leave, mate. Have you got a job to go to? No, I don't have a job to go to, but I have to leave. Well, how does that make... Why are these triggers not making David Moyes think, okay, I need to change something, or I need to leave, or something? I think we can all agree that if he was going to leave, the best time was on a high after the Conference League. When you're talking about statue stuff then, aren't you, really? Leaves on a high, wins the first trophy in years, and it just stays too long. But I think there's almost like a game of chicken going on at the moment. Because I think to assume that David Moyes should leave is to assume that he has been told we're not going to back you. I don't think he has. I think David Moyes has been told he's going to be backed. And if you were David Moyes and you were told that, then hold on a second. Now things look a little bit different, don't they? So even if Skamaka's leaving and Cresswell's leaving and Antonio's leaving, if what the board are saying, don't worry, Moyes, we're going to back you. You won us a trophy last season. We're going to buy you your players. Then you would stick around, wouldn't you? So I think the problem then becomes he's not being backed. They're doing just enough to bid for players, be it Maguire or McTominay or whoever else, but not actually getting them in. So they're not really backing the manager, are they? And I think that's quite a weaselly thing to do, actually. And I don't know what the thought process is for David Sullivan. Because David Sullivan must also be getting all this information. He must know that there are a number of players going to him and saying, I can't operate at West Ham. A lot of people look for reasons why David Moyes shouldn't be here or why David Moyes should be sacked. I mean, there's a glaringly obvious one. I mean, I could list lots of them. The most glaringly obvious one is that West Ham are a company, a turnover, depending on whether we're in Europe or not, between 190 million and 220 million pounds a year. That's our turnover. Right, so we're basically a 200 million pound a year company. When that's your turnover, you cannot afford to hemorrhage 20, 30, 40 million here, there and everywhere. It's enough to say to David Moyes, I cannot continue to let you head up operations when we lost 26 million on Sebastian Haller, when we lost 30 million on Felipe Anderson, when we make a massive loss on Nikola Vlasic, when we're going to make a one-season loss of around 10 million. And I think we've done well to mitigate it to that, by the way. I really do. You're hemorrhaging money. You are costing us tens of millions of pounds in either failed transfers or your inability to get the best out of the big money signings we make. That is enough. That's enough of a reason. Forget the academy stuff. Forget the fact that you don't like the football. Forget even the falling out with players. Forget all of that stuff. The very fact that the person in charge of your assets, because that's what David Moyes is, the assets of the players. We don't have a stadium. The only assets we've got are the players. Well, forget the training grounds for a moment. The assets of the players. The person in charge of those assets oversees a depreciation of the assets. Yes, I'm completely aware that that actually there's been an increase in asset in terms of Declan Rice. But let's be absolutely fair here. Declan Rice was going to make it anyway, and Declan Rice is well on his way under Pellegrini anyway. And I'm not saying that Moyes didn't do well for Declan Rice. I do believe that. I don't just because I think David Moyes is doing well because of all the things I just said about David Moyes, and I don't think there's done a lot of things wrong. I don't need to make stuff up about him. All right, there's enough. He does enough wrong. And I think I would be overseeing that. I'd be looking at this. I'd be pulling David Moyes into the office and saying, well, hold on a second. We were having interest from Bayern Munich for Thomas Souček. People were talking about £50 million, and now look at him. And I think that's enough. So if I was David Sullivan, why is he still in place? So when you add it all up, the fact that David Moyes is losing you money, the fact that David Moyes is falling out with people, his coaching staff and his players, why is there this inactivity? Because here's the real crime in all of this. I want to get back. I just think there's too little focus. So much is on David Moyes. I'm aware I've just spent the last 7 minutes talking about David Moyes. But there's so much focus on him. It's like misdirection. There's not enough focus on David Sullivan. Not enough at all. And it's like, I think David Sullivan's playing to the galleries. And I think he is throwing David Moyes under the bus. David Moyes doesn't deserve to be thrown under the bus. It needs to be let go. He needs to be released from his contract. Because here's what my point I was going to make. It's a game of chicken going on. David Moyes thinks he's going to be backed. He isn't going to be backed, but he's probably waiting to be sacked. And David Sullivan is waiting for David Moyes to resign. It's a game of football chicken. All the while that is going on, and it's by the way, it is a game of chicken that nobody wins. Nobody wins. But I tell you who loses out, we lose out, fans lose out, the club loses out. Because what have we lost already? Well, we've probably lost out on a few signings. Truth be known. We've lost out on a few signings that a new manager would have made. Probably worse than that, we've lost out on an ability for a new manager to come in, do pre-season, assess his squad, work out who's going to play, who he wants, who to sell, and more importantly, which areas in the team are weak, so as he can then recruit in those areas. That's what we lose. That's what we sacrifice. For this egotistical game of chicken to be going on at the moment, that's what we've lost. And I may be wrong, we may go and trounce Bournemouth, but I tell you what, the closest we get to the game, the less confident I am. The less confident I am of that game. We are in complete and utter disarray. It looks like defensively, in midfield, and of course up front. In every area of the pitch, we look shambolic. And the training ground, we look shambolic. In the boardroom, we look shambolic. And you think, what is going on? What is going on with this? I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. West Ham needs strong leadership, absolutely strong leadership. Someone needs to take the helm, and I tell you what, as I look at it now, I don't see anyone capable. Because rather than lead at the moment, rather than Sullivan grasp the net a while, rather than grab the ball by the horns, he seems all too content to play to the galleries, and that's what he's doing. He's playing to the galleries at the moment, and all the while, Moyes is being made more and more to look like the bad guy, and it's an easy stitch up. It's an easy fit up. Do you know what I mean? It's a plant. It's an easy one because Moyes gets a lot wrong, so it's easy to heap some other stuff on top of him. Why not? Why not? It's a typical scapegoat. Honestly, it really is typical scapegoat ploy. And then just it heaps it more, and everyone jumps on the bandwagon. The person with the real power is David Sullivan. Absolutely David Sullivan. And we're in this mess because of David Sullivan. I'm aware that people will say, hold on, we just won a trophy. We just won a trophy. But look at it. Look at what's going on now. It's really hard to make a case that this is some wonderful strategy this whole transfer window, this whole pre-season is some wonderful strategy from which West Ham are going to emerge victorious and far better prepared and better than every other team. There's a bloody good reason other clubs aren't doing what we're doing. That's because it doesn't work.